This is TWiT.
This is not a hard one because, the first question you have to ask is why the heck am I talking about Jack Daniels?
What? As your brown liquor pick of the week? JD? You're kidding.
So there's a few things going on.
By the way, is Jack Daniels bad?
There you go.
I like it.
No, that's the point.
It's okay for cocktails.
It's not bad at all.
It's a fine sipping bourbon.
There's nothing wrong with it. And the more you know about it, the more you'll actually like it, actually.
Okay.
Just like any of these things. But why am I talking about Jack? Because that's not a normal drink for me. But in between doing the show in Berlin, where I talked about a German single malt, which was stunning, the Elbern, and then in Kansas City, when I pulled out, did I talk about Kansas City? The Kragenmoor. I was fishing in Montana.
Oh, that's right. How did that go? Did you catch any?
It's lots. Yeah,
okay.
Great. Listen, this is, you don't get to keep anything, right? It's all barbless fly fishing, and I'm doing the laziest form of fly fishing possible, where you're sitting in a drift boat. I don't have to get wet. I don't have to put on waders. I have a guide. It's either one or two of us. He rigs the line. He literally, can you cast to that point? Because you can put in the pointy ass, you're going to get a fish.
That's nice. That's cool.
And so it's like, how many fish would you like? And I got some good rainbows and a couple of whiteys and lots of cutties.
Do you have to throw them back, or can you eat them?
Put them all. Take a picture with them if they're big and put them back. So I got a few photo keepers. I got a real nice 18-inch rainbow that danced on his tail for me. It was a good show. I gave him a big smooch and put him back.
Right on the lips.
But one of the things we did during that week was we had a little memorial to an old fly fisherman who, unlike most people, managed to die on the river.
Nice.
Most of us die in a hospital, and he actually, in his 80s, had an accident, and the river took him down. And he liked Jack. So we all drank Jack.
Number 7.
And at the end of it, I'm like, you know what? There is nothing wrong with this drink.
No.
This is a good drink.
The drink of rock stars everywhere.
Yeah, no, it's legit. And so let me tell you the story. So Jasper Newton Daniel, also known as Jack, born 1846. And of course, he was a kid during the Civil War and a teenager by the end of the war, and did not get along with his stepfather. His parents were killed back then. And he was taken in by a preacher and a moonshiner by the name of Dan Call. What? It's such a good story. And maybe it's even true, who really knows? There's been books written about this stuff, and I'm not going to go that far. The another aspect of this is that the actual educator in all of this was a guy named Nathan Green, who was a slave. Although by the time that he's working with Dan, he was owned by Dan Call, although was emancipated end of the Civil War. But didn't leave. They continued to work together. And in fact, and Green was the guy who did what's called the Lincoln County process. So this is when we get into what's the difference between Jack, which is a Tennessee whiskey, and bourbon, which is most of these things, right? And it's this charcoal filtration step.
Oh, see, I always thought Jack was a bourbon. It's Tennessee whiskey. That's different.
Technically does not qualify as a bourbon because of the filtration step. And the filtration is done with maple charcoal, and it is done at the new make process. So after you make the distillate, then you run it through filtration. And there's a few ways to go about it, but it's with charcoal, and that technically disqualifies it. It's bourbon, which doesn't do that.
What is the effect of that flavor-wise?
What they say is it, quote unquote, removes impurities, which in 1865 is a fine thing to say, and today is very suspect, because more likely is that the charcoal is adding flavors to the new make,
right,
rather than taking them away. So Call, being a preacher and a moonshiner, has a problem, as they actually have been making it for a while. He's got a lot of flack from his flock saying, hey, you work for God on Sunday and then you make the devil's drink on Monday. What's that about? And Daniel comes into an inheritance in 1875. And so he buys the business from Call and becomes the lead on. This is in Lynchburg, Tennessee, where they've been ever since, although the location shifted around a bit. And to his credit, Daniel hires Nathan Green, the guy who coached him on the method in the first place, as his distiller. So Right, the same folks behind it the whole time. It's the name number 7 comes from the fact that it was the 7th distillery in District 4 in Tennessee, so that's why they called it Old Number 7. Although when the redistricting happened, the numbers changed. They never changed the brand because why would you? And so it's a little niche distillery for a long time until a guy named Lem Motlow takes over in 1907, and Daniel dies in 1911. Which is right in time for the beginning of prohibitions. Tennessee is one of the first states in the union to pass a statewide prohibition in 1910. And so now the company's got a problem. They make alcohol. So they start building out facilities in St. Louis and Birmingham. So now in Missouri and Alabama, who also start passing prohibition. And then eventually by 1920, it's national. And so they're really in a state where they can't make their product. That lasts 13 years. Prohibition is repealed in 1933, but the state laws are still in effect. But in that intervening decade or so, Motlow has made himself into a senator, and he's actually was one of the folks working towards repealing and fixes the state law as well. And so JD, even though they set up facilities in these other states, never really makes them anywhere other than in Tennessee, back and running by 1938, just in time to be shut down for World War II. And then Motlow passes on and goes to his family, who runs it for about 10 years until Brown-Forman shows up and acquires him in 1956. Brown-Forman is it's not as big as Diageo or Suntory or anything, but they own a bunch of different things, including Woodford Reserve, which is a bourbon, and Glendronach, which is a Scottish whiskey. Other than that, and then becomes a much more, professionally made brand. For a long time in those days, it was 90 proof, Old Number 7, 45% alcohol. But around the late 80s, Brown-Forman running it for 30 years or so, they're paying additional taxes because they're above 40% in some of their exports. They're already exporting worldwide. So they start lowering the alcohol level. And they don't really tell anybody that they're doing it. They just do it over several years until they're down to 40%. There's a few folks that kick up a fuss and so forth about it, but they kind of said, listen, sales never are dropping. It just reduces the price of the booze if we make it at 40% rather than 45%. And it is a very popular alcohol. It's hard to say what's the number one. Sometimes it's Jim Beam, sometimes it's Jack. In 2023, they sold 14 million cases of Jack Daniels. So each case is 12 750 ml or 24 ounce bottles, roughly 9 liters. So 14 million cases, about 33 million gallons. There's just a lot of alcohol. It's the largest product in the Brown-Forman line. But part of what makes that number hard to understand is that the Jack Daniels makes many other products, a bunch of specialty versions of their whiskey. Gentleman Jack is very nice. Plus they do things like the Lynchburg lemonade, which has Jack in it. And they break those numbers out clearly because, corporate reporting ain't what it used to be. So not in the top 5 for sure, top 1 or 2 most sold alcohols on this planet. You can buy Jack Daniels by the barrel. If you care to do the tour, they will make you an offer. It's about $10,000 to buy a barrel. You'll get. You have
to roll it home. They're not going to ship it.
You're going to buy a new make barrel, so it's going to be a few years before it's ready, and then they're going to bottle it for you with your own custom label. You'll get about 240 bottles on it, which makes it twice as expensive as just buying regular bottles. And they give you some decanters and things like that. It's beautiful.
They keep the barrel, obviously. You don't take it home.
You can buy the barrel if you want.
So, by the way,
they sell the barrels all the time.
Oh,
you can visit this place, go to the tour, like you said.
Yeah.
I believe this has changed, but in 2003, when we did it, that was a dry county.
Still is a dry county.
Taste.
Yeah. You can't taste
it. I'm like, you guys have to be the biggest taxpayer here. What's happening?
Yeah. So they now have a store,
yes,
where they're allowed to sell commemorative products, which include bottles of Jack Daniels.
Huh.
Yep, that's true.
So that's how they got the exception.
On prem.
Yeah.
So right. You can smell it.
So here's what to like. It's one distillery. It has always been one distillery. It is a big distillery. Their mash bill is 80% corn, very, very high. 12% rye, 8% barley. They have one water source, the Cave Spring Hollow, which they not only own, but for thousands of acres around it as well. They maintain their own yeast strain, which is essentially the same one from the 1930s when they went back into business after Prohibition. They have their own microbiologist that maintains that strain. They ferment for 4 to 6 days, so they do a staged fermentation, and some of them go longer, some of them go shorter. They use the sour mash process, which is normal for bourbon. We talked about this before, which is to say they take a certain percentage, typically 10 to 15%, maybe 20%. I've heard as high as 30, and put the old mash back in the still to help sour the mash to create the flavors that are consistent. They have some of the largest custom-made stills on the planet. They use only column stills. There are 6 of them. They are 100 feet tall. They're just insanely, incredibly massive. They do a 2-stage distillation, which goes up to 70%, which is relatively low, which they then use to chill the carbon, the charcoal filtration. They burn their own. The way they actually make their charcoal is they use maple staves, 2x2s. They soak them in new make in 70% alcohol, set fire to it, control the burn, and put it out when it's nicely charred, and then stack it in these 10-foot tall tubs, which all of the new make goes through at 70%. They then cut it to 62.5, the standard number for American bourbon, before barreling it in toasted American oak barrels. Aging ranges between 4 and 8 years. Any given batch of number 7 is 175 to 200 barrels.
And if you missed last week's show, the theme was "You Are Drinking Wood."
You're drinking wood,
which was the name of the show last week.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that's what we got to, was just this recognition of it didn't matter whether I made it out of grapes. It didn't matter whether I made it out of grain. It didn't matter whether I made it out of fruit. All the flavor came from the wood.
Moonshining is God's work.
Yeah. Yeah. So the whole, the charcoal filtration, taking impurities out, that's not a thing. Right. Really. It's not. Yeah. Let's talk about the major things that actually happen. Removing sulfurs is important, but considering it's only 8, the sulfurs come from barley. It's only 8% barley. That's not that's not a big thing. I think you're preceding the new make with a bunch of the phenols that if you didn't do that, you wouldn't have as much flavor in it. There's lots of temperature games in there. Again, the scale of the operation, in order to produce 14 million cases a year, they have 200 million barrels laid up at any given time across 90 buildings over a 3,000 acre area in Lynchburg. So in a lot of ways I could tell you, Jack is a mom and pop operation. They've not really industrialized. They've just scaled up. They haven't really cut any corners. It's the same water source, it's the same mash bill, it's the same yeast, same woods. Like, everything's the same. It's just big, really, really big. Yep. And so they get to sell it for $20 because they work at that scale. Like, that's it. That's all there is to it. Nothing more than that. This is as legit as any whiskey you're ever going to drink. Not that I'm going to look for it. And at $20 a bottle,
suspiciously like they paid you. Am I missing something?
I've drank better whiskeys, longer whiskeys, but boy, it's hard to be unhappy with the product they make and the way they make it.
It's not sweet, but it's sweet enough that you could sip it. Yeah, like a lot of people who might find,
and that's got to be the 80% corn, right? Corn is sweeter.
Yeah. It is very good for cocktails. Whatever.
Yeah. Well, Jack and Coke is a classic cocktail.
Coke is the thing.
Well, I mean, like a Manhattan or an old fashioned.
Adds a little sweetness. Yeah.
And typically when you look at bourbons, they're not that high in corn. They're 55, 60, like 80 corn is a ton.
Yeah.
It kind of makes it a simpler drink in that respect. But their offset is this additional time in the wood flavors means that it's picking up more of those wood phenols that sort of give it its character. What you just got is a largely scaled family style way of making whiskey. Although those stills are intimidating as heck. There's no pot stilling there.
It's a beautiful facility. It's worth visiting.
But they don't need a pot still because they don't need to take sulfurs out. They just don't have enough barley for it to matter. So it's 40%. This is an industrial scale alcohol. No two ways about it. It is well made. Don't feel bad putting ice in it. Don't feel bad mixing with anything you want. It's rarely used as a well alcohol, which
They have some really nice flavors too. Now they have honey and apple, I believe.
Well, yeah, the
I know, but I mean, that's how you get people into the fold.
That's it. Yeah.
What is Gentleman Jack? Is that it's double? It's double mellowed. Ooh.
Yeah, they do a 2-stage aging process on it, and the ABV is higher.
Okay.
But yeah, it's just a more expensive way to make their same booze for most part. And again, I get nothing bad to say about it. Tim Huckabee, who organized that fishing trip, is a dear friend of mine, and makes me do all of the fly fishing. The only reason I do fly fishing because of him, and he loves Jack, and I got a lot of flack for him for making fun of Jack, and then I drank it because it was this particular occasion. I'm like, you're right, I'm wrong. There's nothing wrong with this.
Nothing wrong with it.
I tell a story.
Nothing wrong with it.
And to be clear, I received some very unusual bottles of alcohol on this 26-day trip that I took.
Of course.
And so we will be talking boutique-y weird scotches next week.
Good.
The hills have bourbons.
One last question. Is it worth getting a single barrel Jack or no? They do offer that.
Yeah, well, it's worth a try because now you're talking about the notes are going to be the same, right? You think the typical JD production, and old number 7 is 200 barrels. So they're taking all these different barrels and they're combining them to get to a consistent flavor. What's cool about a single cask is it's that cask. You don't know what you're going to get.
It's also barrel proof. Oh, it's not all barrel proof, but some is. Yeah. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So they do have a barrel proof single barrel, which means it's a lot more alcoholic.
Yeah. Well, because typically what's coming out of they go in at 62.5 and then you go 4 to 8 years. You're going to have a big hit right up front because Tennessee is warm, right? So as the barrel stabilizes at the high temperatures, you're going to lose a bunch of alcohol right away.
Right.
And then it's going to settle down over time. But it's going to come out of there in the mid 50s at least.
But
that's pretty potent.
Barrel cask strength is 125 to 140 proof, so it'll put hair on your chest. Actually, it'll burn it off.
There's no way it could be 140 because that would mean it's going in at 70, which they don't even barrel at. They barrel at 62.95, right? Really, if it lost no alcohol at all, then it would be at 125 proof.
Okay, I'm looking at their website. It says anywhere from 125 to 140 proof.
Yeah,
I don't know how they're doing that. That seems odd.
It seems unlikely.
Okay. Episode 88 was very lucky. Thank you. A very lucky episode. 3 8.
It's all good to be home, right?
Yeah. Thank you so much. Richard Campbell is at Run As Radio. That's where his podcast is, runasradio.com. Also, .net rocks. It's been rocking for 20 years.